B3313 is a ROM hack for the game Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo 64. You hear a name like that, and it already kind of sets a barrier for you. Like, what are these numbers and these letters supposed to mean for the title? Wouldn't that make it kind of obscure to find? And you'd be correct. I believe B3313 stands for, like, Build 3313, which might line up for one of the dates of the beta for Super Mario 64. Which happens to be one of the elements of the hack. Other elements of the hack might include creepypastas, as well as other rumors you might have heard from either on the playground or the Super Mario 64 iceberg that had gotten popular recently, around the time that the ROM hack was made. I took a liking to this game because it was one of only a few games that I know that kind of try and capture this one feeling of just feeling like an empty ambient space. There are so many different and distinct areas that all intertwine, and it's deliberately designed as if it's this big labyrinth to fuck with the player. One interpretation I heard somewhere that this game is kind of what it feels like for 3-year-olds to play Super Mario 64 for the first time, which is kind of an interesting interpretation. I remember one game I used to play, and I used to wander around it for hours without really trying to accomplish the goals, was either Ratchet & Clank or Scooby-Doo Unmasked. My first game glitch experience ever was with Scooby-Doo Unmasked. I remember just running around the overworlds, and then I got stuck in a corner, and then Scooby-Doo ended up spinning in circles until he fell through the world into blue hell, and then the entire TV froze up with a bunch of shapes that looked like snowflakes. At the time, I was young enough to where I didn't realize what a game or a game engine was. So the only justification I could think of in my head was that somewhere in the game in the future, a secret boss caused me to get a bad ending where I fell through the world. A secret ice switch or something that caused all these snowflake patterns to appear on screen. It is a cool game in that the premise of it is just you run around this big empty beta hack. But the more you play into the game, the more you realize, wow, this emptiness isn't just an aesthetic, the game really is just empty. It is very easy in this ROM hack to feel burnout because I feel like there aren't enough incentives for the player to keep exploring. Sometimes you have to kind of challenge yourself to complete the ROM hack, like getting enough stars or finding what the next spooky area might be, or seeing what kind of variables the game can flip and show you something completely new. But a lot of the time the player just won't want to get there. Sure, it might be a nice change of pace for a game to be able to ask the player to make the challenge for themselves. But I feel like something this game would benefit more from is at least having some sort of concise angle as to the randomness. Have just enough incentive to keep the player looking, and just when they think that they're finally lost, give them another tiny breadcrumb, and then they're back on the search, being like, alright, this has to lead up to something. A tiny nugget of wisdom I'll give you, though, is that once the cat's out of the bag, it is out of the bag. There are some things in this game that might imply that there's supposed to be lore for the player to follow, but there's not enough to make it feel like it's ever intentional. Throughout different areas of the castle, you'll see the walls are destroyed and cracks in the bricks, and you'll even see bent-up pictures of Bowser hanging on the walls. It would almost lead you to believe that maybe Bowser finally accomplished his goal of taking over the castle in at least one parallel universe of whatever this game is. But then you'll have other moments that just feel like flat-out trolls. Like you'll end up finding this one area of the game that's just complete polygonal chaos where all the walls are clipping into each other with skewed textures. And then you go through one door and then you find a bedroom seemingly built for Bowser. One anecdote I might have for creepypasta storytelling. To me personally, it is less scary if you have a toad decapitated with hyperrealistic blood or hyperrealistic eyes. It is more scary to me if you approach a toad and it has a text box saying something like, "Can you hear the screams? Please help me, I am dying." In this vein, you're only given a vague implication of the horror, but it's up to the imagination to fill in the blanks, which is the worst part. Boo. I have this theory that sometimes the game probably isn't even that scary if you know what other Nintendo games are, because I've seen other streams of people playing the game, and they'll walk into one room and be like, "Oh, what is this music playing? It's kind of weird." And then you'll have somebody else playing the game be like, "Oh, this is a cool remix of Yoshi's Island music." The only other game I can think of off the top of my head that might capture a feeling like this would be Dark Souls, which I know is a meme comparison to make for games nowadays, but stick with me here. Dark Souls 1 is more limited in world space than B3313. Playing through the world of Dark Souls 1 feels like playing through a giant McDonald's play place with how much the world wraps back in on itself. I remember there are so many times playing through the game where I'd find a new shortcut and I'd be like, oh, I wonder where this is leading, and it's like, oh, back to Firelink Shrine. At least you could rest at Firelink Shrine. You could even level up. In B3313, you'll spend about an hour exploring the castle, trying to find a new route, being like, I wonder how much of this place I can explore. And then you go through one door, and then you see, like, wait a minute, I've been to this place in the castle. And then you go into a level, and then you die, and then you have to sit there and make the realization to yourself that it's going to be another 2.5 hours before you even get back to where you just were. This is around the time where you'd realize that this isn't the fun kind of exhausting, where it feels like you just got off of a bus to another state for a vacation. This is the bad kind of exhausting where you can palpably feel the time you're wasting as you're playing through the games, running through the hallways. To add a bit of salt to the wound, there are several toads you can speak to throughout the game who all have the same placeholder text that you get when you start up the game in the first place. That same placeholder text that says, this castle is exclusive to the show. Sometimes the game does hit the nail on the head with its level design, and it shows that the map creator can actually make some impressive things with incredible atmosphere. There's just something so surreal that you can bring out about these old 90s graphics. But then other times you'll just have the other 2/3 of the levels in the game be like different copies of beta levels. You're just stuck in Bob-omb Battlefield again, except there's less of the color palette. So there's this shift between really high quality levels that you'll unfortunately end up forgetting because the only quality of the other levels is that there's a lot of them. Dark Souls had interesting level progression in that a lot of the level design was based around mini puzzles where you had to get past certain enemies, all placed in such a way that if you were to just run through, you'd get ganked. Then once you're free to explore, you'll find out interesting things like, hang on, this wall isn't even real. There's a whole area to explore here with cool items. Or, hang on, this chest isn't real. It's eating me alive. Ash Lake will probably go down in history as one of the most paradoxically well-known yet best secrets in video games. You find the initial area. Oh, it's a wood shield. You find a secret behind it with a hidden wall. Oh, a Twin Humanities. That's cool. You find another secret behind that wall. Entire area of the game with the best atmosphere, hands down. The only moment comparable to this I could think from B3313 is the library sections. The ROM hack actually does something impressive here where it reads your system clock and then it can open up the path to the library. And you open the library by pushing a bookshelf out of the way. Everything else has either been just a locked door or a warp. So having this extra layer of player interactivity to find a secret automatically boosts it to status. I've not played any of the newer Mario games, but just from watching other people stream them, I can tell that a lot of the appeal of the games comes from the application of making set pieces for Mario to practice his new platforming maneuverability mechanics. Bowser's Fury is a good example of this. Most of the map is just open freestanding. It's almost starting to make me feel like, what if we got a Souls-like that was also secretly a platformer? Except I think we already got that. It's called Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. One more game that I just thought of that I'd like to recommend. If you want to explore a world that feels big and empty and also very atmospheric, try Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. If you're into JRPGs, this will have you pretty much tied over. The level geometry in this game is a bit simplistic, with it all being hallways, but trust me, they make those hallways as interesting as possible, and it does actually tie in well with the gameplay, so you never feel quite cheated. Playing through this ROM hack has been pretty inspiring, though. I've even been getting into a bit of game development myself to see if I can try and recreate something similar to this, but with a bit better gameplay involved. So far, I've just been pulling out my hair trying to recreate all the smooth platforming mechanics I've seen in other games. There's a lot of complicated maths that I can't keep track of at once, but I'm hoping I'm getting onto something eventually. To keep me occupied, though, and making progress with the game project, I have just been making aimless level designs in the trench broom. A lot of the inspiration I've been taking is like photos of liminal spaces, but I've decided to branch off and actually look at different themes to make the game interesting in some regards other than just empty hallways. Like I said, the player's going to need some incentive from the game to keep going, be it the interesting level design, the atmosphere, or the cool gameplay. Something's got to keep them going, otherwise you'll just be going a lot of nowhere fast.